Now, for decades, a grooming gang scandal has blighted the country, but the question remains, have we moved on without fully addressing many of the issues behind it?
Well, now a GBNews investigation is looking to restart a national conversation about the crisis and find out what went wrong then and what needs to change now. Let's talk to Charlie Peters, our news documentary filmmaker, who has obviously made this film for us, which is going to be on TV tonight, isn't it?
Tonight at 8 p.m.
8 o'clock. I mean, the whole grooming gang Rotherham situation has caused a lot of consternation, and there are questions, of course, about how it was investigated then because of some racial sensitivities and all the rest of it. What have you uncovered?
What I've uncovered is that it's not unique to certain small parts of the country, like Rotherham, Rochdale and Telford. It's actually swept the country. We've uncovered up to 50 different towns and cities where there are credible reports of grooming gangs taking place. We visited many of them. We've spoken to dozens of whistleblowers, activists and survivors. And the feeling we've got from pretty much everyone is that this national conversation that we should have had when the lid blew off the scandal a decade ago never really took place. You've alluded to why that's happened, really. There's a sort of a political correctness. Usually that means, good manners, but actually, good manners has consequences. And one of those consequences is that we ignored this problem for a very, very long time.
Let's not underestimate how difficult it is, though, because there will be people, and it's a minority, but a sad minority, who will use any excuse to sort of perpetuate racist behaviour.
Of course.
Right? Yeah. So as we look at, and as you do in the film, looking forward to how we then look at these things in the future, how do the authorities then balance that out to make sure they're doing a thorough job without pandering to racist attitudes?
I think the easiest way to achieve that is to be honest, to be open and accountable and to be truthful. And unfortunately, for too many of the authorities involved in this conversation over the best part of 3 decades now, that truthfulness has not been there. Still, now we know that police forces are not recording the ethnicity of perpetrators. Accountability is lacking for a lot of public officials who are involved in failing to deal with this. And a lot of survivors feel as though there's no attempt to kind of mandatorily report instances of CSE and child abuse. And so, the way to avoid the difficult conversation and the way to avoid pushing this conversation into the long grass or away from reasonable actors, and the way to keep this on track and make it have positive effects is to be upfront, to be honest, to be truthful. And that is the intention of the documentary.
Will we be hearing from victims in your report?
That's right, yes. Several survivors have contributed to the film, both directly on camera. Unfortunately, many of them are petrified, as you can imagine, because many of their perpetrators either weren't caught, or when they were caught and when they were convicted, they went to prison for paltry sentences. Indeed, one of the survivors in the film, an incredibly brave woman called Elizabeth, she found out via the news that her abuser had been released from an open prison after several years, just a few actually. So, a lack of seriousness has infected this debate over many, many decades, and I think survivors feel as though they never received the sort of attention and the national reckoning that they deserve.
Finally, in terms of, you say you've found other credible reports in other towns and cities, is there a sense then that even now, these reports are not being taken seriously?
I think so. And the term used by one of the activists in the film is that plenty of girls are still being fobbed off by the authorities, which is extremely distressing, of course. Now, we know that this is a live issue. GBNews will drop some exclusive reports over the weekend about how it's still ongoing, about how the authorities are still failing many of these girls across the country. And yes, that is still a core part of the issue.